Get home for supper. Have to get home for supper.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you for your patience. We are back from a brief recess, and we're now moving on to the final report for our design review meeting here Monday, October the 30th. And that is 156 Prince, 199 Grafton Street, and Laurel Palmer Thompson is here to present the report. So thank you.
Good.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We're back again. This is an application for 199 Grafton Street. It's a request to approve the building facade plans for the proposed 8-story, 158-unit apartment building located at 199 Grafton Street. It's located in the 500 lot area in the downtown mixed-use neighborhood zone. The application was before the board in March of 2021, and it received design review approval at that time. It also received approval from council through a site-specific amendment to construct the building to 6 stories with bonus height. So this is the site plan for the proposal. This is the polyclinic, and this is the proposed building, this L-shaped area. So I've just, I've put together some slides that shows the original proposal and the revised proposal. So the applicant, the original proposal, I should say, when it was approved, a bonus height was granted to 6 stories, but there was also a variance approved to exceed bonus height by 10 feet. Their applicant in this current submission is proposing to incorporate 32 affordable housing units. There's 126 market units for a total of 158 units, and the original proposal was 12 affordable housing units. If the current design is approved by the Design Review Board, the applicant would be required to proceed to Planning Board for recommendation on the request for a site-specific amendment to construct the building to 8 stories, and this would include a variance to the step back required on Prince Street. So, as per the bylaw, the proposed design submission, it was sent to an independent design reviewer, Greg Munn, and on October 26, 2023, Mr. Munn submitted his formal review. He outlined a few recommendations in his report. Overall, the recommendations were for the parking garage and access area. He recommended that the Hillsborough face of the parking garage carries the same aesthetic of openings and voids with vertical openings that match the size and shape of the Prince Street windows without glass composed across the facade instead of the wide openings. It's recommended that the metal panels are removed from the design and the material is limited to brick. So I'm just going to go to the Hillsborough side so you can see. So this is the Hillsborough side. This was the original proposal, and this is the current one right here. And you can see these are the large openings that he was talking about. And if you flip back to the Prince Street side, this is what he was talking about here, this rhythm of the windows and the openings to just mimic that on the Hillsborough side. So mass and scale of the building, he proposed 2 options. I'm just going to flip to the slides. One is recommended that the 2 top floors of the 8-story proposal are stepped back to achieve a 45-degree angular plane as per the bylaw requirements. If that option isn't desirable, he also proposed an option to, an option to extend the building over the parking garage to maintain the same amount of units, but to leave the height that's 6 stories. So this grade area on the bottom would show the actual building height at 6 stories as opposed to 8, and it would just extend out further over the parking garage instead of that setback, that substantial setback that we have now off of Hillsborough Street. There was also recommendations on the windows. I'm just going to flip back just so you can see. the style of window. So these styles here, he recommended that the small operable awning over larger picture windows should be replaced with either full-height casement windows with cross mud and true divided lights or no mutton bars at all. And then the second option was the stocked awning panes are to be of equal size to be more in keeping with the aesthetic of the traditional window stock of Charlottetown. Double or single hung windows are not recommended as this will detract from the contemporary aesthetic of the building. But cross-divided lights or equally proportional awnings will be arguably more modern than the proposed windows and more appropriate to enhance the character of Charlottetown and its historic content. So the report from the design reviewer was forwarded to the applicant, and the applicant did agree with some of the points that the design reviewer raised. They supported the recommendation for the parking garage. They did have concerns with some of the comments on the window style because they felt they should be more modern, and the applicant felt that mutton bars, how can I explain this? Not the ones that are embedded in the windows, but the ones that are outside, not actual mutton bars, that they were a cheap alternative. And they didn't really feel that they were appropriate for the building. The step back on Prince Street, they did have concerns with that. They felt that it was a non-necessary hurdle and presented cost challenges. It also disrupts the current location of their elevators, diminishes the size and therefore rent of the upper premier units along Prince Street. It's for these financial reasons that they didn't agree with the design reviewer's recommendation. They also had concerns with the recommendation to extend the building at 6 stories across the parking garage because they were trying to keep as much light in the 5-story east wing of the polyclinic so that views wouldn't be obstructed. And they wanted to, they felt that it would negatively impact some of the properties along Kent Street that back onto Clark Street. So a variance to the 45-degree angular plane, as well as the variance above bonus heights, will be required under a site-specific amendment to obtain a building permit approval if the design is approved as submitted with the 8 stories. So if there is no step back or if it's not, the 6th level isn't increased across the parking garage, then the applicant will be into a variance for height and the step back to the 45-degree angular plane under the site-specific amendment that they have applied for. So should the board approve this application as it stands, a detailed application will be sent to planning board. Public notification would be required for the requested site-specific amendment. And the request would be to exceed bonus height. So I should note that in the previous application, there were concerns from some of the residents along Clark Street and from some owners that own properties along Hillsborough Street on the height of the building at that time. We worked with them as best we could to mitigate any concerns that they had, and in the end, the project did receive approval. We can't gauge what the outcome would be with residents if we take it back to a public consult, but that's the purpose of the public consultation meeting, is to gain their input. That the project was 2 years ago, so things, their opinions may have changed. Things have become more, housing's become more of an issue within the city in the last 2 years. So basically, we are recommending for the design reviewer's recommendation. Staff is standing behind that at this time because that is a recommendation put forward, and they are the reviewer is a professional as far as architectural detailing. But depending on how the board chooses to rule, then we will deal with the variances and the site-specific amendment if it goes forward to planning board. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them, and the applicant is also here as well to answer any questions that might come up.
Thank you, Laurel, for your report. I can open it up first to the board. Does anyone have
Yeah.
questions for myself or
I do,
for
Madam
Laurel?
Chair.
Go ahead, Your
Sorry I
Worship.
was late there, Madam Chair, but other business took precedence. Laurel, the development is going from 6 floors to 8 floors. The Holman Grand, is that 8 or 10 floors? Just for a contrast.
I'd have to count.
It is
But I
10?
mean, but the other thing you need to keep in mind, the Holman Grand was developed prior to,
Oh, no, no, I understand that. I'm just trying to get perspective.
prior to the 500 lot area regulations. And we did do, the Holman Grand, when it was developed, there was considerable public, public concerns that were raised over that building, and much to do with the height and also the design of the building.
Right.
And there's still people that feel that it isn't appropriate.
Not the height, but the design, what was...
Well, I have heard both, but when we did do the 500 lot plan and the waterfront plan, we did recommend for bonus height to be within the waterfront area and the downtown core. Now, the Holman Grand is in the downtown core, so at this time, that height would probably be appropriate at 8 stories.
Yeah.
Bonus height. If it is 10 stories, then it is, has exceeded it. But off the top of my head, I haven't counted the
Yeah.
stories, and
No,
it's been.
NASME from Coles Associates confirms that it is 10 stories. So you get the polyclinic, which is the old McKay building. I'm looking at the drawings. How does that connect with the new structure? Is there a connector? Is there green space? Like, what's the,
Yes, Your Worship, through the chair. It's, from what I remember, there is a connector from the new building to the polyclinic building, an interior connection. And I think it also connects through the parking garage as well.
right, and that parking garage, the proposed parking garage is two levels, 3 levels?
It is ground floor and then a level below ground floor.
Right, right. So there's no variance required between the existing building and the proposed new structure if they're actually joining together?
Well, it would be, yeah, it's one building, so it would be connecting, and the applicant is here, so he can speak to that. He would know more about construction details. But from what I remember with the plans, it does connect to the polyclinic building so that people can access the parking garage and have access to the polyclinic. Now, the other thing to note is this is the site. It's kind of, I'm just going to go back to the one thing. Positive about, if it is allowed to extend to 8 stories. The only 2 street frontages are on Hillsborough and Prince Street.
Yeah.
So it's hidden behind the polyclinic building, so you will see a tower that would extend above the polyclinic building. And then you also, on Kent Street, which would be like to the
North.
the north, you have properties along Kent Street, so they would also buffer the building, and then you've got Clark Street. But now, some of those buildings that are on Kent Street, they back on and they access their properties through Clark Street. I think there might be 1 or 2 buildings at this end of Clark Street that actually do front onto Clark Street. So, I mean, it's a 6-story building. They did have concerns with light and, the fact that they would be looking at a 6-story building. They would probably raise concerns again with an 8-story building.
Yeah.
But we would consider this interior block, this building.
Yeah. No, I know the area because I grew up in the area.
Yeah.
And I remember the
Yes, I
the red
remember
onion
you
was there.
talked
It was an
about-
old apartment building. One year it was red onion, the next year it was green onion. It was just the colors they painted it.
Yeah.
And then it burnt down. I think on Clark and the corner of Clark and Hillsborough, I don't think that fronts on to Clark. It fronts on to Hillsborough. And the one that's next to it would front
Yeah.
on, but I think it was at one point in time, a business entrance.
Let me look, maybe we can kind of see it here. There's a street, like Clark goes here,
Yeah.
and then I think this one, you're right, fronts onto Hillsborough, but
It
I think
does.
there's these 2 buildings here possibly front onto Clark. And then these are all back Clark serves as a back alleyway to these ones,
Yep.
to my
Okay,
knowledge.
thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Beck.
Well, it seems to me that the fly in the ointment with this is the 45-degree setback. 45 angular setback is kind of the biggest issue here, and there was an option, two options given. One is to do the extended angular or extend it back, keep it at 6 stories, and go out over the back end towards Hillsborough Street. I guess, and maybe the architect, are you the, yeah. Yeah, so what is the, maybe could you speak, I know that seems to be one of the major hurdles here in this, or points of opposition, if I could use that terminology. I know it was mentioned about cost and the placement of the elevators as it currently stands. Are there other options that would be available to accommodate maybe could the elevators, and again, I'm asking this because I just don't know, can the elevators be resituated somewhere in the building, or are there other options that might be available that would allow either the angular setback, because it goes against what our rules and regulations are. Are there any other options to it, I guess is what I'm wondering, and maybe if you could, if that's okay, if he could speak to that, maybe provide some clarification on that, if there are other options, or, I guess the other thing I'm wondering is how many units does that take out of play as well, too? Because I guess that's the other thing I was wondering, if that angular setback is put in place.
In terms of the step backs, as my response to Laurel was, we'd like to, work with the city and everyone involved. In terms of number of units, it's more square footage. You rent a building per square feet. And we're considering, that this project started some time ago, and, due to, unforeseen circumstances, it just didn't get off the ground. And as with everything in life, things change. Sometimes it's just unpreventative. So, nobody's at fault or complaining here, but we did have to relook at this project and make it work financially for our client. And that's where we are here today. The step backs, when you're building a building of this stature, size, it all comes down to foundation and structural grids. And someone can back me up on this. And once you disrupt that structural grid, it can become not only costly, but complicated in terms of, as I've said, we've now have to relocate our elevators. Well, we want to come into this building. We want guests, we want the residents to have the elevators right there. So to answer your question, in our mind, we don't really like the idea of moving the elevators. We'd sooner keep them as they are. Each step back reduces about 10 feet over, we're looking at, a couple thousand square feet of rental income at a loss, not to mention every time we add that wall that comes down, it's to a point where we have floor joists from front to back, and now we're introducing this shear load on these roof joists. So to solve that, we put in a large beam. That beam needs to be supported all the way down 6 stories into our parking garage, and our foundations have to be beefed up to do it. So that could potentially be a $500,000 item just to step these back, as Laurel said. So, as Laurel said, in terms of the 6-story option and pushing that back, it's been always our hope that we wouldn't go back. We strategically stopped it there. We were hoping we didn't even have to go back as far as we did. Because of the east wing of the polyclinic is 5 stories. We didn't want to, and it is a health clinic, so there's, clinics, there's offices. We don't want to impede that as much as we can, so we stopped it where we did to allow light not only into those offices, but into, the central courtyard, if you will, that we're trying to keep between the parkade and the polyclinic, which is going to become our major barrier-free access. And to answer the worship's question, this is attached to the new building through a pedway. There'll be new landscaped access from Grafton Street around the back, and there will also be a new barrier-free access, drive-through access that's covered away from the elements through the parking garage. I hope that answers your question. When you really look at that side elevation, I can understand in a more lower area of the city with, less, density, how you might want to approach taking a 4-story building and stepping it back, such as the first applicant, has gone through. But when you go from 6 to 8, it's really going to be insignificant. Prince Street is a well-traveled, it's a, vibrant street. But, at the end of the day, there is quite a hodgepodge of architecture and elements down through there. Not too long ago, if you were to walk by after the Velvet Underground got out of business at 2 a.m., you wouldn't have had the most enticing street. That's changed, it's evolved, and as everything has. So that's what's brought us to this application in front of you tonight.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions, Councillor Buck? Go ahead. You're good? Okay. I just had a quick question, Laurel. Any of the other additional questions when it comes to the affordable housing units, et cetera, those will all be captured when we have to go back for site-specific, is that correct?
Yes, and if approved for the site-specific amendment, it would have to go to the city's affordable housing committee.
Right, gotcha. So today, we're just looking at the design. And so staff has recommended 2 options, I believe, that you are looking for direction from.
Yes,
Committee.
the design reviewer put forward 2 options and recommendations for the design reviewer outlined 2 options in the report. Staff is supporting his recommendation. We're not, it's the reason why we contract an independent architect. We're not specialists in architecture, so this is kind of out of our purvey. So we do rely on our design reviewers to provide us strong recommendations, and he has. So if the board feels that the 8 stories is appropriate, then we can proceed. So what would happen is it would have to go to council because the applicant or the board would rule differently than what the reviewer has recommended. So if it receives council's approval, then we would take the application to planning board for the site-specific amendment to go to 8 stories. And that 8 stories, so that would be 2 stories that would exceed bonus height. So the way the bylaw works, the downtown area and the waterfront area, when we brought in the 500 lot plan and the waterfront plan, we brought in form-based codes, so we don't regulate density within buildings anymore within that area. We gave parameters on what people could build to, what developers could build to, so that their height, the mass, all that, as long as it was within either the height requirement for the zone, or if they were approved to bonus height, they could put in as many units as they wanted within that box, basically. So that's where we're at. So they're asking to exceed that additional requirement of the bylaw to go to 8 stories. So 8 stories typically in the downtown core would be permitted, so that would be this area and where the Holman Grand is. Further down the street where the polyclinic is, that's considered downtown mixed-use neighborhood, so the bonus height requirement is 6 stories in that area. So if it was further closer to the core, we would be looking at 8 stories bonus height, and there wouldn't be any issue as long as it was approved to go to bonus height under the bylaw.
And Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Your Worship.
that's why I pointed out that the Holman Grand is 10 stories. You look at the apartment building in the corner, Prince and Grafton, it's 4. Maritime Electric's 5. So I don't think it'll be, Laurel, out of context.
I'm not
I know you're
the
from Borden,
architect.
but you're in
I
Charlottetown
am
every
from
day.
Borden, and we don't have tall buildings in Borden.
Just one
Gateway
last,
Village may be the tallest.
just one last question, Madam Chair. So the square footage, Kane, what's the square, like, what's your square foot, like, what's the footprint? I can't, I'm looking, I don't, the drawings don't show them, or I can't. I think I have a letter that says 68,000. Okay, is that the letter at the beginning? 85, okay, that's the end.
I guess what the board has to think about is how do they feel this building, if it goes to 8 stories, when you look at these renderings, can you just pull up?
70,
21,000 square feet.
the footprint. Yeah, that's the square footage.
So when you look at the renderings, do you feel it's excessive, or will it dominate the skyline, or like in the streetscape within this area of the town, or the city, I should say? I mean, it's a tall building either way. 6 stories or an 8-story, it's a tall building. It's not a skyscraper, but it's a tall building for Charlottetown, for what we're used to. So this is, like when you're looking from Kent Street, this is the 6-story building, this is the 8-story building. This is and this is the only rendering we had for the Hillsborough Street view with the original proposal, so you can kind of see it peeking out behind the buildings, but this is a better face-on view that they provided for this application. So you see it along Hillsborough Street here. I don't think I've...
Thank you. So the Planning and Heritage Department is encouraging the Design Review Board to approve the proposed building facade plans for the proposed 8-story building, 158 units, 32 of which will be affordable, apartment building with parking located within and under the building located at 199 Grafton Street, as per the designer reviewer's recommendations. Furthermore, the Design Review Board's recommendation will be forwarded to the Planning Board, outlining assessments of the variances and the design. So that's what we're looking at today, whether or not we are going to accept the Planning and Heritage's recommendation to accept the design reviewers. Is that correct?
Yes. And I will say that the only thing with this application that gives me comfort as far as the height is where it's located with mid-block. So it is being screened by, other buildings, the polyclinic buildings along Kent, but you're still going to see that height above those buildings. So those are kind of the things you have to weigh with the design.
So if this board approves the recommendation, then it goes back to Planning Board to address the site-specific.
It would, but then we are into we've got conflicting. We have one board that's approving it to stay at 6 stories, and we're taking it to Planning Board for a site-specific amendment. So we would be saying that the Design Review Board supported 6 stories as opposed to 8. So either way, it's going to be, or could the Planning Board, it may get to Planning Board, and this board supports 8 stories, and the Planning Board feels that it's not appropriate to go to 8 stories. So
Go ahead, Your Worship.
Yeah, Madam Chair, okay, the height is 8 stories, right? And the footprint is 21,000 square feet, and we'll have 2 levels of parking, 3 levels of parking for how many cars? How many vehicles?
218.
Yeah. Is that in our,
think we
like,
had-
I'm
It's all
scanning.
there. It's
And
all
what
there.
does it say?
218 or
Yeah,
something like that.
okay, yes.
232.
232.
Some was commercial, some was residential, right?
We're maintaining the original 118 spaces that's currently used for the commercial polyclinic.
Which is just on asphalt.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're adding an additional 114 spaces for the apartment.
And it'll include 32 affordable units.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah. So, do we need a resolution to move it forward?
Thank you.
So-
Thank you, Your Worship.
Can I just seek a clarification here again? So, we have Mr. Munn recommended 2 changes. Either the 45-degree angular plane or extending the east end of the building and keeping it at 6.
Yes.
So are we being asked, because in that original recommendation there, it says 158 units, which includes 126 market and 32 affordable, correct?
Yes.
So that would mean that we are approving an 8-story complex.
So
Not with the angular setback or not at the 6-story with the extension out towards Hillsborough Street. We are being asked to approve the 8-story as outlined by the applicant.
through the chair, okay, so the staff's recommendation was to follow the design reviewer's recommendation. The request from the applicant is to go to 8 stories without the step back. The reason why the design reviewer identified the 45-degree angular plane is because that is a design requirement that's outlined in the bylaw.
Right.
So that design requirement, if the board chooses to approve it as 8 stories with a vertical wall and no step back, then that 45-degree angular plane does not meet the bylaw. So therefore, if the board approves the design as proposed by the applicant, when it goes to planning board has to rule on whether they will recommend to council to approve that 45, variance to the 45-degree angular plane and a variance to the height under an application for a site-specific amendment. I know that's a lot, but
Okay.
that's where we're at. So that 45-degree angular plane is, the reason why it was identified is because it is actually a requirement in the bylaw.
Okay.
So it may get, so if the board supports it the way it is now with under the applicant's proposal with no step back or anything, a variance is going to be required. We don't know, and it's the same as the last application. The board supported various variances under a site-specific exemption. The board supported the design review board. But when it got to planning board may have denied that site-specific amendment or those variances, or they may have denied certain ones under the site-specific amendment. So they may approve, like in the previous application, they may have approved the exemption to the parking garage for commercial at ground level, but they may not have approved a step back on Prince Street or something. So it just depends. So what we're looking at right now is the design of the building.
Yeah.
And then when we get to planning board is going to have to rule on the site-specific exemption.
Okay.
Okay, so today, this board needs to decide if they accept staff's recommendation or not. And if we
Yeah,
accept
based on the
staff's-
bylaw.
Yeah, so if we accept staff's recommendation, this will go back to planning board for you to then evaluate the whole 45-degree angle.
It has to go to planning board either way for the
regardless.
site-specific
Yeah, for site-specific, yeah.
exemption, but it's, we need to determine, you know, if the board is happy with the design or not happy with the design.
Okay.
Do they want an 8-story building on that site, or do they prefer a 6-story? Do they feel it's more
Gotcha.
appropriate?
Yeah, okay, so is that clear? So we need somebody to either accept staff's recommendation or not through a resolution of this board. Do I have anybody?
I will.
So moved by Counselor Beck to accept staff's recommendation as outlined in the
And I'm
report.
seconding the resolution because, again, we're discussing or looking at 232 parking spaces, up over 100 what's already there, 100 plus, right, Kane? 32 affordable units, correct? And housing that is needed
Yep,
because we are in a housing crisis. And if it requires an additional 2 floors, which is already within the context of the downtown area of 10 stories for the Holman Grand and the other buildings I mentioned, I'll second the resolution.
thank you. So the resolution's on the floor. Any questions?
More comment. I think it's, again, going back because we're looking at design, and, you know, I'm not a designer. We don't even have a lot of people here that are expert in the community on board stuff for design tonight, but because our staff have recommended that we accept the design review person, I'll in favor of the
Okay,
resolution.
so the resolution's on the floor. All those in favor of staff's recommendation? Okay, so that's a unanimous vote. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, Laurel, and thank you to our applicant who is here with us this evening.
Motion to move?
What?
Motion to adjourn?
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Yeah?
All those in favor?
Okay.
No new business?
Oh, no.
Yeah, no new
No
business.
No business, Jackie?
No.
No business.
Okay, and move to adjourn.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moved by Counselor Beck and seconded by Counselor McCabe. Yeah.